Buenos días, bienvenidos a este acto de inauguración de las actividades de la Cátedra Blanca del segundo semestre en la Escuela de Arquitectura de Madrid, que además va a ser un acto en el cual se va a entregar unos premios en el ámbito nacional. Yo quería, como director de la escuela, agradecer en primer lugar a nuestro conferenciante, a Kerez, el haber accedido a venir a nuestra escuela, el compartir parte de su tiempo con nosotros y la conferencia que nos va a impartir a continuación después de la entrega de premios. Y agradecer, por supuesto, también a CEMEX, promotora de la Cátedra Blanca, el que con esa relación entre universidad y empresa se puedan generar este tipo de actividades, como las que está realizando la Cátedra Blanca. Le voy a ceder la palabra al profesor Ignacio Vicens, que es el responsable, catedrático de proyectos y responsable de la actividad de esta cátedra. Profesor Vicens.
Gracias, director. Como habéis podido ver en el vestíbulo de la escuela, se ha presentado la exposición de las actividades de la Cátedra Blanca. Por un lado, algunos de los trabajos que han realizado los alumnos de primero en este cuatrimestre, en el curso que la Cátedra Blanca ha organizado para ellos, y al mismo tiempo también algunas de las carteles que recogen estos 10 años de las conferencias de estos 10 años de actividad de la Cátedra Blanca. Creo que, en fin, os puede interesar, desde luego a nosotros nos resulta muy atractivo ver que estos 10 años han sido útiles y que ha venido gente muy relevante como de la calidad de la persona que hoy nos va a dar la conferencia. Pero antes de presentar a Kerez con 2 palabras, tengo que decir que, como siempre hacemos, en la ceremonia de apertura del curso y en la de clausura del curso de la Cátedra Blanca vamos a dar algunos de los premios. En este caso queremos dar los premios a alumnos de esta escuela que han ganado los premios de la ciudad posible. Tenemos con nosotros a Jaime Isla de CEMEX, que es el director de Cemento Blanco de CEMEX, que es el que dará los premios a estos alumnos que han conseguido, darán el premio, el diploma y el talón, ¿verdad?, que es no menos agradable sin duda ninguna. Y antes os tengo que decir también que desde hoy, se cuelga en la web de la Cátedra Blanca las condiciones para presentarse al premio Sáez de Oíza, que ya cumple 11 años. Este año será la 11ª convocatoria del premio Sáez de Oíza. Tengo que decir que este año sí, que la familia vendrá a darlo y que sí, que nos ha prometido que dará también además del diploma y del talón, un dibujo de Javier Sáez de Oíza, que es, yo creo que de lo mejor que se puede conseguir. Luego también daremos en la ceremonia de clausura el 10º premio Alejandro de la Sota al mejor expediente de fin de carrera, al mejor de fin de carrera. Y este año comenzamos con un 3er premio, que queremos que se alargue, es el primero de una larga serie, esperemos que tenga el mismo éxito que los anteriores, que será el premio Javier Carvajal para honrar la memoria de ese otro gran catedrático de proyectos de esta escuela recientemente fallecido. Entonces, sin más, para hacerlo largo, vamos a dar los premios. El primer premio de la ciudad posible es a 4 alumnos, que son Pablo Leñador Jiménez, Ara González Cabrera, Noa González Cabrera y Javier Arias Maroto. Yo creo que muy bien. Gracias. Se lo tienen ellos, me parece. Bien, el primer accésit era para Eva Cuadrado y Enrique Morales. Y el otro accésit es para Rodrigo Domínguez González. Magnífico. Entonces ahora ya, de verdad, 2 palabras para presentar a nuestro conferenciante de hoy, Cristian Kerez, al que todos vosotros conocéis. Es una personalidad compleja, intelectualmente muy relevante, es profesor en el Politécnico de Zúrich, como sabéis, y yo hubiera querido que antes de que le escucharais todos hubierais podido llegar a una conversación, leer una entrevista que le hicieron. En realidad era una conversación muy interesante con Georg Frank hace ya unos cuantos años, en las que yo creo que se ve muy bien la personalidad y, digamos, la preparación intelectual de nuestro invitado de hoy. Yo me quedé entre las muchísimas cosas que había ahí con algo que me pareció muy relevante para una escuela de arquitectura. Decía ahí que el gran reto que tenemos ahora es encontrar criterios para evitar la arbitrariedad. Lo dice mejor, pero bueno, esa es la línea, ¿verdad? Yo creo que esto es importante porque, y sin embargo, su discurso no es solo sobre la objetividad de la arquitectura, es mucho más interesante que eso. Él mismo también sabe que estos parámetros objetivos muchas veces son contradictorios y pueden llevar a soluciones irrelevantes, ¿no? Y entonces propone, supongo que nos lo dirá ahora, ¿no?, ese recurso a lo fundamental. A lo fundamental, evidentemente, en términos conceptuales, ¿no? Y yo creo que de ahí, luego a lo mejor podemos comentarlo, la elegancia de su arquitectura, que es despojada, es sencilla, es como un aforismo de Pascal casi, ¿no?, como una proposición de Descartes, ¿no?, limpia, clara, intelectualmente profunda y muy atractiva. Bueno, yo le dejo la palabra y espero que disfrutéis de su intervención, que será en inglés. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. No hablo español. The first time that I was here in Madrid was when I was a student. Alejandro de la Sota had an exhibition at the ETH, and I just loved it. And he actually should participate in the inauguration, but we were told that his health condition is not so good anymore, so he couldn't make it to come to Zurich. And this is when we decided, if he doesn't come to us, we will go to him, to visit him. And we visited him in his studio, and also visited all of his buildings, which was at that time much easier than today. The reason that I start with this anecdote is not to make a, let's say, artificial link to this school or to Madrid, but much more, there was something in his work which I could refer to. And first of all, his work was not very consistent. You know, you could not tell this is a style, you know, and the next building will look like that. All of his buildings were surprising, but they were not surprising in a sense, you know, like, let's say, a magician can surprise us. You don't know what he's doing and why he's doing things like that, and not like in another way. But they were surprising more in the sense that when you saw these buildings, that you were wondering, why did not anybody before him came up with this idea or do it before, or why are there not more buildings like that? They had a very strong logic. They had a very pragmatic evidence that made you follow the idea and discover actually the surprise through this coherence that were only in each project itself. And this was at the time, let's say, when there were other architects, younger architects, kind of rewriting the history of architecture with deconstructivistic metaphors. So exactly at that time that it became an important reference. And I remember this afternoon that we spent in his office, you know, and we nearly couldn't talk with each other because of the language, but he was explaining his project so precisely with making little gestures, how people behave in the architecture that he designed, and reveal the ideas for these gestures. So I you know, as usual, I will show some projects, and I thought that I show it today in a way that I will try to explain how these projects relate to each other or don't relate to each other. Because I think architecture is very different than, let's say, art. You are, as an architect, always reacting to something, to a commission, to a client, and you are constantly reacting to a change which is going on. So you cannot relate in the same way to similar commissions also, because expectations are changing. And this should be the topic of this lecture. Actually, I will start with the Schoolhouse Launch Bar, which was the first project I could do in Switzerland, which had a certain scale. And it seems that it's also the last project that I will do in Switzerland for different reasons, which I will explain later. Can one maybe switch down the light a little bit? Is that possible? Okay. This was also the first time, you know, that we had a huge plot, and all the efforts which were done also in the purpose to save the dimension of the plot, which was for me the biggest quality in this, let's say, brief of the competition. So we stacked all the different compartments on the school on top of each other, and tried also to make these different areas of the schoolhouse depending on each other. So you see steel trusses surrounding the building twice, once in the area for the classrooms, which is divided by a recreation area in the middle, and once for the gymnastic hall on top of it. And in between, the trusses are only visible inside. And even if this is, let's say, the rough structure, and it's not defining any space at all, you can already imagine all the spaces that will be later on integrated in this school. That was the construction site going on exactly at the same time that we had the exhibition with the 1 to 10 model that you saw in the picture before. And, you know, I'm always interested in bringing things together, not only by putting in one box, but also, for example, if you see here the classrooms, you will notice on which level you are. If you are in the first class or if you are on a higher degree, because the texture of the trusses is constantly changing. And we call this way of defining space a subtractive way, because first you build the entire building and then you start dividing it. First you divide it with some concrete slabs, and then later you divide it by the glass walls. We put a lot of effort to not hide this very first initial raw structure, but on the contrary to expose it. So the building itself, you know, remained very much the same as on the construction side, as you can see here. Only later, when the teacher started to inhabit this space, it changed quite a lot. It also seems that this is, let's say, a lot of people said, well, this looks very Brazilian, this project. And I guess this is maybe a problem in Switzerland, where there is a need for privacy, you know, which in this public space, of course, is not a really topic. And, you know, we try to avoid every, let's say, reduced, small, narrow space like corridors. So you have a monumental staircase in the middle, which always opens to the outside, which opens to 200 square meter big recreation areas in front of the classrooms. And in the middle you find this stair which is connecting the levels, but also separating the school into two different compartments for younger and older kids. And this stair only meets in the fourth floor, where there are again public spaces. And this fourth level, you know, is like the opposite of the ground floor. Maybe it's the same material, it's the same structural glazing, it's the same concrete roof, the same steel trusses, but from point of view of typology, it's the inversion, you know. It's like a courtyard typology, while you have on the ground floor a closed core in the center, and here the center is open. And from there you can go to the gymnastic hall. The gymnastic hall needed a lot of exceptions, and the building administration didn't like it a lot. But the kids love it the most, and it maybe also shows the value of rules and regulations in this building department. But as a summary, you know, you could say, well, it's a simple building. It basically consists of these steel trusses, and they are repeated again and again. But the intention was not to, let's say, reduce it to this single aspect, but much more to say, well, the material doesn't matter, you know, it's not a topic for itself. It's only a tool to develop different spatial qualities and to bring them together. And there were a lot of discussions, you know, why to expose this steel structure, you know, why to kind of give a naked impression to a finished building. And it was also for me kind of open questions, you know, can the kids relate to that? Do they like it or not? But of course, this picture is posed, but you can imagine, you know, that these trusses, they remain apart in these buildings, but they integrate in a lot of different things, like, for example, where they hang their coats directly on the glass wall. And they even found very strange ways to relate to this steel structure. And this picture is really, I mean, when you are there, you will see the kids that are sitting like this in a steel truss. Of course, we never thought about that, you know, but the whole building was more about a very rigid architectonical order, but it also shows that if you do something not to serve people, but just to follow a architectonical rigor, you know, it gives a freedom to discover something or to relate also in an unexpected way to the building. When the school was still under construction, we were invited to two competitions for headquarters, and one was headquarter for Holcim, which is a concrete corporation, and they wanted to also, you know, reveal the material in their own building. And this is the place where this company that works worldwide now was founded, about 40 minutes from the airport of Zurich. And the first idea was to relate this new headquarter in terms of scale with the industrial buildings which are already there in this neighborhood. This was the feasibility study that we were given, which shows different parts of the building. And when I saw these diagrams, I thought it's terrible, you know, if you separate each compartment one from another, you could also stay in the existing different location, which are now spread all over the entire site. And we thought it would be nice if you can just look through the building in different directions, and that there are light wells passing in different directions and connecting the levels with each other. So this was one of the very first sketches that we did to imagine the space in total contrast to the feasibility study that you saw before. And at the time we were also discussing a lot with a founder of a research institution, the Paul Scherrer Institute, and he said, you know, most important is what happens outside the office. It's not important the office space itself, but how people kind of can meet and come together and observe each other. So we introduced in the program a lot of areas which were not foreseen, and these areas, they are always kind of around these circular light wells. And in the section you can see that on the ground floor there is the research area, then education, and on top administration. And of course all of these areas need a different amount of, let's say, openings. And these were just studies, you know. I mean, a concept doesn't give you a building or doesn't give you a project, you know. It just reveals endless possibilities, what you could do. And I always like most this moment of total randomness. And it's always the same idea, but what to choose. And it was hard to define on these graphic illustrations. So we constructed this bird cage, and you see the tape, the horizontal tapes that indicate the different levels, and you see the axis and the diameter of each light well. And even if it looks like a surrealistic conceptual model which was invented after the project, it was the most important tool to have an overview over each level, and also to be able to discuss this arrangement of light wells with the structural engineer. And basically, it's a simple building, you know, just columns and slabs. But these columns, they are not straight, because they always have to avoid the circular light wells. So we made the interior structure out of perpendicular columns, which means that the building is everything except stiff. And to make it stiff, we had another circle of columns around it. And these circles, they are inclined so that they are always overlapping to really make this building stiff. And of course, we also like that in the end it looks quite, let's say, monumental on the outside. By the way, the inclination of these columns came from the connection with the fire security staircase, which is red. So it maybe looks like a metaphor, but in the end it follows a very pragmatic logic, how to bring things like fire evacuation and structure together. And for Holcim it was also important to have a building which is very sustainable. And honestly, for me, sustainability is one of the many ways how architecture can die, because it leads very often to wrapping a building, you know, to covering it with lots of insulation and to kind of distract the outside from the inside. And here we made like two structures. They belong to each other, they work with each other, but they are also different in appearance from each other. You know, I lost plenty of competitions, and I also show you, I think this is the only competition that I won that I will show you, at a very good jury. And it was also before the crisis, which even had effect on Switzerland. So this model is not so much built as an object, you know, as it may seem to be, but really to investigate in the space, to imagine this space, and exactly out of this perspective, you know, it might never be built, which is also maybe even the case, even if we won the competition. And then at least you have an impression, you know, how this space could develop and how it changes from, let's say, very rational, horizontal perspective to a more surreal, baroque, vertical perspective. And of course, they belong to each other, and I couldn't tell which aspect is more important. And this was the second competition, and it was nearly done in the same time, which also explains why they somehow look similar, even if they are in many aspects opposite from each other. We knew that, you know, people will think this is too high, so we made this diagram to say, you know, it's not really a high-rise building. There are also other buildings in Zurich which are even higher and which you will not really notice. And you have to imagine that the building on the right is the headquarters, and the building on the left is their branch in London. So, of course, I would have preferred the commission on the left, but it went to an English architect called Norman Foster. So, but, you know, of course, we wanted to compete with this Gherkin. So this brought us in a very desperate situation, you know, how to compete with such a small building that even though it's so small, it's too big for Zurich. And I'm very proud of these 3 models, but because these are the only one that I did myself, you know, from all of this lecture. And it was also when most of my staff lost any faith that we will give in time and come up with something. But it also has a certain kind of logic, you know. I wanted to do an order which is not kind of related just to the size of one layer, of one level, but a monumental order, you know, which goes over, let's say, 3 or 4 levels. And this is done on the outside, on the surface, but then I thought, yeah, these other architects can do that better, you know, this exterior design. And so I should bring this large-scale order to the inside, and what is easier than to push a nail into a foam board. And then we, you know, we thought, well, maybe it could make sense. If you, for example, think that these nails, they are the circulation of the building, they are tubes, and in these tubes there is the fire security escape. And again, all these were possibilities how you can arrange a staircase within this closed box. And then, again, I couldn't decide myself, you know, which is the prettiest. And it finally was this one, and it was the one that the engineer and the fire policeman liked the most. And this is the same. And you could say it's a very common scheme. You have a core, and the core is stiffening and it's load-bearing. And then you have these wires, these steel wires on the outside. Yeah, and you can also walk on these tubes. It's also a role model for a career, you know. The more you advance in the hierarchy of Swissery, you know, the more your office will move to the top, the more physical exercise you will get, the older you will become. But when we presented the project, it was already a moment of crisis, and the stock value went down to the cellar, and so the CEOs didn't think so, you know, how to say, optimistic about the future, that they were interested in this project, which is, of course, not the easiest to build. We'll give a variety of floor plans. Every floor plan is different. And most of the office space is open office space. Again, we tested, you know, this scheme and wondering how could this space look like in the end. And we thought, yeah, if you have these wires in front of the facade, it's much better than columns because you have a better view to the outside. And it also has a kind of inversion, you know. There is a very massive area at the inside of these cores and tubes on which you can walk and which also connect all the different levels with each other. So this project was really totally for the wrong time and the wrong period, you know. It would have been an experiment and would have also needed a dedication to build, which was at that time not anymore possible. So the reason why I say that is because the next project, I try to deal with the same idea, but to make a very cheap version and to kind of deal with, let's say, Swiss mediocrity, you know. You know, I mean, Switzerland doesn't have a crisis, but it sees around Switzerland there is always, there's a lot of crisis. So, I mean, we built plenty, but the only topic is, you know, how to save money, how to save energy, not to show off too much, to make something very modest. And yeah, I thought, why not? You know, I can also do something modest. And so this brings me, let's say, to the modest period of Swiss projects, you know. I mean, the project before I liked, but let's say it's also a bit heroic. And this is the opposite. It was again for a school, but this time for 2,000 people, and the surrounding is quite messy, it's not very beautiful, and we didn't want to make a gesture. On the opposite, we wanted to make something very quiet and calm and, you know, modest. The jury president told me, hey, this time you really have to do something cheap and flexible, and you will see, you will win. And I did it, but I didn't win. But this is, you know, the ideal building. Everything prefab, just columns and slabs. And then, of course, we couldn't leave it like that, you know, because we had to, for example, put in a staircase in this very rational, economical grid. And we thought, well, maybe this is not a problem. Maybe this is, you know, an opportunity. This stair can destroy all the boredom and monotony of this economical, rational plan. Because if you implement a stair, you know, you have to take away some of these beams. And if you take away these beams, the floor doesn't hold anymore, so you also have to leave the floor, take away the floor. If you take away the floor, you have a huge hole. So the stair in this sense is maybe destroying this grid, but it's also creating a space, a hallway, leading from one level to the other. These are all possibilities how you can implement a cascading stair in this existing grid. The colors show different inclinations. And we repeated this stair, so the stair is like becoming an ornament, creating a space within this grid. Here you see the openings in the floor. And this is the program on one side, classrooms, on the other research areas. The dark surfaces are storage. And the space which interested me again was the space in between, which was very random, which was opening in vertical, but also to the outside. And this, again, just a small part. These are 40 out of 200 meters. Looks quite messy, which is also okay. But you see, like, kind of the idea of the last project, you know, to have these cascading stairs connecting everything, translated into a different way how to build. This is the entrance hall, and you see that you can straight go through all the different levels. And these staircases are also bringing the students, the teachers, people together, and would create or offer a space to kind of relax, or to make a project, to listen to crits, or other things, or making an exhibition. Yeah, I was wondering why I lost this competition, and I thought maybe I was not committed too much. Maybe I was just dealing with my own fantasies, you know, making a nice model that nobody asked for, not doing any renderings that, you know, clients just love so much, even if I personally hate them. So I thought, this time I do it right, you know, and probably I will win. And there was quite a stupid master plan, creating this volume which comes out of, you know, playing with mud, or anyway, it doesn't make so much sense. And the whole work, and I think this was the competition we spent the most time and money with, was how to bring sense, you know, to this random surface, how to create also a facade which could give a scale, which could relate to this beautiful roof in front of the main station of Zurich by Miley and Peter. And we were really getting, let's say, into detail, and thinking about how to connect these two elements, making plenty of studies. And an office building is, I don't know if it's really architecture. Because architecture for me is about how to define space, and this is what you don't do in an office building. You know, you just make a structure and somebody else does the space in it. But it is somehow interesting because it brings you to a very basic question in architecture, which is the relationship between core and shell. And these studies were all, you know, about the relationship core and shell, and also the relationship between the program and this total random geometry. And finally we came up with this scheme, and whatever was not regular, which means was not flexible, we integrated in a triangular form, And this form is ambivalent, you know, it can be used for different things, but it also integrates the course. But the course in terms of program, they remain readable, so you can see there's a stair, and with a lower wall there is some sanitary spaces. There's an elevator shaft, which is not round but rectangular, and so on. And because this dimension changes, also the position of the stairs changes from one end to the other to, in the end, allow this space, which is totally generic, which you can easily divide into singular office spaces. And we thought it's also interesting if you have a core and it's readable, it's understandable. You know, it's not just a wall, but you could say, well, this is the structural element, this is the stair, this is the elevator, and so on. And it also became a topic of scale. Inside the building, you have a very small-scale structure, which is also related to this small interior space, while on the outside you have a very monumental structure where the rails become the beams of the slabs. And this is from the main square of the station in Zurich, the perspective. And most of the time we spent with this. This is the calculation how efficient the floor plan is, you know, how much money you can make with it, how you can divide it into 4, 5, 6, 2 different offices, fire security, very exciting, and also how to build it in short time because it's a difficult location, installation, and so on, details for all possible calculation. And we even had to make a research on on shit of pigeons. This is, you know, because they were worried, you know, what is if a pigeon could land there and shit in this beautiful building. So you see in Switzerland, a lot is about keeping things clean and going very much into detail and caring about everything. This is the first prize. Surprise. Second prize and third prize. And you have to imagine for the first 2 prizes, they made another stage because the difference was so big to the third prize, you know. So, again, first prize, second, just if you want to make competitions in Switzerland. Third prize, maybe I'm not objective, you know, but there are things that you can count, like, for example, the efficiency of a floor plan. Everything which is white is not usable. Very inefficient. Very efficient, you know. And then this was the announcement of the winning project. And it's in German, so trust me if I translate. And the text is more or less, this is opening the gate to this new area in Zurich, and it's the most iconic building that won. Yes, so it's kind of difficult to kind of develop a perspective out of this experience. But it brought me to a commission in Lyon. Herzog de Meuron are doing there a large project, and they invited some architects, and I was one of them. And basically this thinking in different elements and how to relate them with each other was the perfect exercise to, in the end, deal with this new project, which is hopefully going to be built in 2 years. On the right side, you see this red square, which is our building, and it's on the main axis of this area of new developments, and it relates also to the main axis of the old town. So we thought it would be nice for a change also to make a historical building. This is a classicistic building. I like that too. And if you look closer, you see, well, it's generic also. I mean, all the windows are the same, the program is the same, but it has these elements that always articulate 3 different compartments, you know, a socle, intermediate part, and attic. And they achieve this by adding some rhetorical elements, which is kind of difficult for a building like that, you know. I mean, an office building is basically some columns and some slabs, and we didn't want to do more than that, you know. So you see here the columns, the grid of the offices, and some cores which have a stiffening function for elevators and stairs. And we also thought, if this is the inside, we have to show it at the outside, you know. So they are also standing in front of the facade. And then we thought, well, maybe if we make these columns in different ways, maybe if we kind of fabricate the concrete in different ways, you know. So we start with a very, let's say, old-fashioned way by just putting some pressure on top with a machine like that, or which is common today, with a vibration needle, or maybe, you know, which is not so common, but for flagpoles and other sophisticated architectonical elements it's used. You can, with a movement of centrifugation, make a very dense and very small concrete. So what you will get is 3 different scales. On the left, you see the socle, the most vernacular, massive element. In the middle, the common size of a column, and on the right side, you see this later way of fabrication. But this means that not, you know, the facade changes, but the entire structure changes from one level to the other. So it is in this sense very classical, you know. I think it's my first classical building. And we also thought that it might relate with its soberness and you know, its order of columns also to the old town of Lyon. Model 1:33, and you see here that also the texture of the concrete will change quite a lot. Yeah. It should, by the way, it should be built in white concrete. Maybe we find today a sponsor. This is a building that is not from our office, and it's also a building that the client that we had didn't like so much. He preferred this view to the lake, and we understood that. And we thought it's nice if, you know, you always have a view to the lake, no matter where you are. So The space is one open space, no dividing walls. Everything which could disturb this view is outside the building, and it's terraced so that you can always see the lake. It was finished last autumn. And the roof is slightly different. And it's, you know, it's not a design, it's basically the building code pushed to the limit, you know, what is feasible. And this gives this very amorph geometry. This view from the, let's say, bedroom, through the kitchen, over the dining room, to the balcony. And the building is about this amazing view. Even the dog sits there and looks outside. So I think this is the first building we ever did that even dogs understand. So I don't have to explain so much. This is now under construction. It's called a house with a missing column. It's again a very simple, you know, scheme. Basically everything which is not apartment is not inside but outside the apartment. So on the back you have the elevator, on the right side you have the staircase, on the left side you have the installation shaft. And these functional elements are also the beams, the structure of the building. And because of the building code, we couldn't make a second shaft. So this is why this structure is actually fragmented, you know. And this enhances the scale of these beams and of these columns. And the main topic is not so much this, let's say, functional, structuralistic arrangement that is so well known even from 60s and 70s, but it's much more about how to change the scale within a very, let's say, modest dimension of a domestic settlement. And if you see here the clients with the raw structure, you also see how monumental their house will become. Yeah, good. I don't know, I always try to do things not too often, not to get too much bored. So I was very happy after doing these houses in a very, you know, rich neighborhood to be asked to make a proposal for upgrading of a favela. And my mother is from Brazil, and she always told me, if you go inside the favela, you will get shot. So it sounded quite interesting to build there. And these are common, you know, upgradings of a favela. And it was like kind of introducing Brazilian modernity in this vernacular, handmade settlement of very small houses. But I like the favela very much. And I think, you know, you don't need an architect to make architecture. And if you look at this, let's say, urbanism on top and the urbanism below, you know, which is from famous German architects, Gropiusstadt in Berlin. The floor area ratio is higher on top. it's cheaper, it's more flexible, it's more dynamic. So, I mean, that there are at least some advantages. And to look at the favela like that is not new. It's not. It has a tradition. This is from Rudowski, Architecture Without Architects. This is from John Turner, claiming that these new settlements for people out of a favela are like prisons and are not really, and they also have a bad nickname. They are called Singapuras in Brazil. These are some impressions of a favela. I mean, it's a nice garden, isn't it? Very minimalistic. And the typology is like that they don't have staircases for several people, but each apartment has one staircase going directly to the street, which was a typology that we took over. But most of all, I was impressed by the spaces in between these small houses. I mean, very labyrinthic, but this is also quality. So we proposed to also build small houses. This is a house for 2 apartments. Actually, we designed 5 different houses. 2 with 2 levels for 1 apartment, 2 with 3 levels for 1 apartment, and 1 with 4 levels and 2 apartments. So this is all. And then, you know, we mixed it. We arranged it in a very irregular way. And every single house is repeated over 50 times to create the outside space, which is full of variation, where you cannot tell in advance how does it look if you turn around the next corner. And this outside space was the main interest of me, and to visualize that or to experience that, we built this time a model of the outside space in the same scale as the other projects. This is the building permit. I don't know if it will be built, maybe. If you know somebody who needs a favela. I think it's always important to kind of investigate in what you're interested in, even if you don't have the commission. And I always wanted to do a high-rise building. So I gave some lectures at the ETH. This is from an autobiography of an undertaker, the last chapter, the climax, showing a building that you probably all know. And if you look at the floor plans, they all look more or less the same. But if you look at these little points, you see that they totally change. On the left is the upper level, on the right a lower level. So even if these dots look the same, they are not. This is on a very low level, and it's getting more and more massive. And we were doing a lot of kind of trials, you know, how to bring an evidence to this dramatic change of weight and of structural condition. It's very simple. On top you see that the weight of the building is as much as 1 level, and at the bottom of 30 levels. So it's 30 times bigger. So why should it look like the same if the weight changes so much? So we thought at least we could change the structure 4 times, keeping the dimension of the column and introducing more and more columns to keep this very fragile dimension of nearly 20 centimeters. We made the stiffening outside of the building with tension wires, which also changes 4 times. This is the overlap of all these tension wires. And it's actually very simple principle. A tent, which is one of the oldest human buildings, is built exactly like that, and we just carry it to, let's say, a different dimension. On top, on the left, you see the ground floor, and at the bottom on the right is the last level. So you have a constant change of density of this building. Which hopefully one will see here, maybe. Okay, anyway, but you can imagine, that this is not about increasing the dimension of elements, but increasing the number of elements. Now it works. And the expression of the building is just this change, which is given and hidden in nearly all high-rise buildings. Gives you also full flexibility at the inside. And you can divide each space differently. You even can take out some slabs because they are not needed anymore. This was for a presentation of the client, and you see this master plan from Kisho Kurokawa, where they invited 7 architects from all over the world. What was kind of nice is, I mean, this building is just a simple box, but through these wires, it changes its form. And it also creates a space in between the street and the volume. Inside it also gives a quality of, let's say, lightness and openness, which is very rare. Normally you find here on the ground floor a heavy core, and here it's the opposite. You find a void in the very center. This is for conferences, and on top you have a courtyard in the middle, from where you can see through bars and restaurants to the outside. And most important is how does it look at night? This is the waterfall, the lightening. And then the last is, we called it the rope. They said it's not possible to build something like this in China because they rescue people with a truck like that. And I couldn't believe it, but this ladder is 100 meters high. And it's not so easy with all these tension wires, to bring this ladder through. I don't know what it feels like to be rescued on this ladder. But anyway, it made us to change the project, to keep the main idea, to have similar elements which are kind of repeated and densified. But this time we worked only with triangles, with one single structural element. And these triangles are connected through the slabs. And it also gave the opportunity to have a very, let's say, small-scale element for this huge tower that will also reveal the scale by adding an incountable number of structural elements. And it's again, let's say, a building without hierarchy. Everything is stiffening, everything is load-bearing, everything is open. This is, let's say, a proof that you will not lose spaces or office tables. From far away, it will not look so much different than the other buildings. But the closer you come, the more you will also see how the interior is exposed outside the building. This actually should be built. The client likes it a lot. He says, make some small changes, keep the square form, the box, and take away the rest. Okay. And I will stop with two projects from China. And they always ask for references, you know, and this is difficult because I don't work with references. But I like these color stones because I don't know what they mean. But they look very, very mysterious and complicated. And I thought it's nice if a building could be the same, and also if maybe a space could kind of be at one time very small, intimate, but on the other totally open. Like this space inside the Forbidden City, where you can walk through each small building and experience a large extension, but only through walking through these different courtyards. And we call this concept of space ornamental space, in the sense that you cannot clearly define the borderlines of one spatial element, but that the space develops constantly and is both intimate and public and open at the same time. So these were all concept studies to come up in the end with this project. And I mean, the facade maybe looks quite ornamental, you know, like a design by an artist or a graphic designer. But it has much to do with to relate a building with intimate spaces to this vast land of this huge park in front or these huge buildings around it. On top you see what the competition brief expected, two different buildings, and we actually thought, well, if you make one building, it really should be connected on each floor. And this brought us to the problem that you will have different loads on the columns of the parking, which is already under construction in the underground. And to balance this, we implemented these steel trusses. But different to the school that I started the lecture with, This time we closed half of the trusses and exposed the other half, which lead to this ornament, which is nothing but, let's say, program and structure in the end. And in the middle, in the central area, you have also these openings in the hall. This is, again, a model revealing this space at the inside. And this open structure is repeated everywhere inside the museums, the auditoriums, the banquet halls, and of course in this huge hall which is connecting the two programs. And it's a very different, opposite concept of space than, for example, in the school or in these buildings that I showed you that are now under construction or just finished in Switzerland. And I think that, you know, in a country where this huge scale is given anyway, it's boring if you just repeat it or confirm it. So this was like a kind of attempt to translate it into something else, where this extension again can become adventure. The last competition for free museums and a park in Guangzhou. Basically, we were most interested in this park, relating these three buildings with each other. And again, we thought, well, it would be nice to make a building which is not, let's say, like a box, but more as an organic, sculptural form, or which is maybe more like a mountain than really building. And on the other side, we thought it would be interesting if, this is a conceptual model, if this building is not for the program, because the collection is not that exciting. It's mainly post-war local calligraphy, but that this huge scale of the building of 80,000 square meters is there to create a building, a space outside the museum, a space which belongs to the park, a public space, which could also be used for people that are not so much interested in art. This is a picture from the same model, of course in a different scale. And you can imagine this interior space which brings together, let's say, architecture, landscape, art, people, and this is another proposition for a space like that. So the building is not so much about the interior inside, about the program, but about how could the square inside, outside of this building look like. And this was the final model, which is also the one which is on the announcement of the lecture. And if you see at the background the people, you can imagine that this cavern-like shell structure is not really a roof, but also certainly not a wall. It's just the gesture of covering a public square. And of course there's no glass on top. It will rain inside this space. To finish, I show an animation that we did for the presentation. So this is the entrance to the building. And the interior space is not anymore the scale of a building, it's much more the scale of landscape. And you can also walk through this building without buying a ticket or entering. I mean, what is important to know is that art museums, they come also, let's say, from the tradition of a socialist club in China. It's not so much about protecting and research on artworks, but it's also about entertainment. It's also about, you know, what you can do for a huge public. I mean, Guangzhou has as many tourists as Paris. Most of them come from the area of the Pearl River Delta. So, of course, it was also the intention, you know, to make a building which is basically for the public, you know. And it's not so much, let's say, art museum to kind of protect artworks from public. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions?
Bueno, es la oportunidad si alguien quiere hacer alguna pregunta. Se levanta y le doy el micrófono. A ver, ¿nadie quiere hacer ninguna pregunta? Sí, perfecto, aquí a la derecha.
Hello. Just as really quick question, would you say you're building modern monuments by the scale of your projects and the aspect of them?
Well, it really depends, you know. I tried to show that I also did some very modest proposals, which still are in a, let's say, consequent manner, following spatial ideas or concepts. But with these last projects, of course, it is about to create something which is a point of reference in this. I mean, Guangzhou has a population of which is bigger than the entire Switzerland, and of course I wanted to create something which gives a meaning to this huge scale and to this enormous city, and to create like a intellectual point of reference. I don't know if it's so monumental, this building, because let's say the most monumental space is inside, you know, it's not imposing so much. And also if you look here, yeah, it's big, of course, but through its form, it's related, it's like an artificial rock or an artificial mountain, and you would not primarily say, if you see a rock like that, it's monumental. So it's more reflecting certain conditions. I also think the favela project is somehow very modest, and it's paying a lot of respect. People that built favelas or are living in a favela, and project is very strongly supported by favelados, and this means a lot to me. So I don't fantasize about, you know, the bigger the better, and how can I make something monumental, but yeah, I mean, if you have a small house and you make something small, it's maybe not so interesting. So these houses with the 3 apartments was like a kind of inversion of the given commission. But yeah, sometimes I like monuments, sometimes not.
Thanks.
¿Alguien más? Última oportunidad. Pues nada, muchas gracias, Christian. Thank you very much indeed for your